Hi everyone and welcome to the tutorial. Today I'm going to be demonstrating how to work a sewn-on Icord border. In a previous video I demonstrated how to do a knitted-on Icord where as you're making the Icord you are simultaneously attaching it to your knitting, but today we're going to do a sewn-on version of that. This is a particularly useful technique if you have sewn two pieces of knitting together and you have a seam that you want to hide by putting an Icord over the top. And that would be a little bit tricky to do with a knitted-on Icord, but it's really easy to do if you've pre-knitted the Icord and then you can just sew it on over the top of the seam afterwards. For this technique, you're going to need the knitting that you want to attach your Icord to. So I've done a small swatch here. You need some needles. DP ends are ideal. You can also use a circular needle if you want, but make sure that it's got a short cable on it. And that's because an Icord is always knitted on the right side. So you knit the right side of the Icord and then you slide it to the other end of your needle to work the right side again. And if you're working with a really long cable on your circular needle, it's just going to take you a really long time to slide the stitches. So to make the process as quick and painless as possible, DP ends are ideal. And I'm using the same size needle in these DP ends as the needle size that I used for this swatch. You're going to need some scissors. You're going to need some yarn to actually knit your Icord out of. So I'm using this yarn here. It's the same yarn that I used for this swatch. So it's a DK weight or 8-ply yarn. And I've pre-wound off a little bit of this yarn. And this is what I'm going to use to sew the Icord to the knitting. So I want to do it in the same yarn that I've used for the Icord so that you can't really see where I've sewn the Icord on. And if you want to do that as well, I would recommend to pre-wind off a little bit because we're going to start sewing the Icord to the knitting before we've actually bound off the Icord. So you won't really get the opportunity to grab some of that yarn unless you do it before we start. I've got my tapestry needle that I'm going to use to sew the Icord on. And I've got a crochet hook and a little bit of waste yarn. And I'm going to use that for my provisional cast on that I'm going to do for the Icord. And that means that once I've finished sewing the Icord onto the square, I can undo my cast on edge and graft it together with my live stitches that are still on my needle of the Icord. And that's just going to make a really neat, seamless Icord that goes all the way around your piece of knitting. All right, let's get started. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is my provisional cast on for the Icord. Now you could use a different provisional cast on method than the one I'm using today, and you could also not use a provisional cast on method at all. You could use a normal cast on, like say a knitted cast on or a cable cast on. I'm using a provisional method because, as I mentioned, it will allow me to undo the cast on once I've sewn the Icord onto my knitting, and then I can graft the live stitches with the stitches that are still on my DPN, and that'll give me a really invisible join where the two ends meet. If you use something like a knitted or cable cast on instead, you'll have to bind off your Icord and then sew your cast on and bind off ends together. And that will be a little bit visible. So if you just find it easier to use a normal cast on method, you absolutely can, but just keep in mind that it probably won't be as neat as using a provisional method and then grafting. So I'm using the crochet chain method, which means I need to crochet a chain. So I've just got a little bit of waste yarn here and I'm going to make a slip knot. So I leave a bit of a tail and then wrap the yarn around my finger once, and then pull the long end of yarn through that loop, like so, and then pull the tail end tight to create this loop that's adjustable in size. And then I'm going to put it on the hook. So I'm going to just flip this around because I hold my yarn in my left hand when I crochet. So I want the long end of yarn on my left. And then I'll put the loop on the crochet hook and pull to tighten. And now I'm going to make a chain. So I'm going to wrap the yarn around the crochet hook and then pull this yarn through the loop of yarn that's already on the hook. So just like that. Then wrap the yarn around again and pull it through the loop on the crochet hook. Wrap the yarn again, pull it through, wrap the yarn again, pull it through, and I'm just going to keep doing that until I've made a short chain. Doesn't need to be super long because our Icord is only going to be worked over a few stitches. So just keep going until it's about that long, And now I'm going to pull the loop of yarn that's on my crochet hook nice and wide so that I can pull this tail end through and then pull it to tighten, and there's our completed chain. So I've got a smooth side on this side of my chain, and if I flip it over I've got a bumpy side, and this is what I'm going to pick up and knit stitches into. So I'm now ready to grab my DP ends. I'm going to insert one of them through one of the bumps on this side of the chain, just like that. And then I'm going to grab my Icord yarn, leave a bit of a tail, and we're going to start picking up and knitting stitches. So I wrap the yarn around my DPN and then use the DPN to bring the yarn through the bump on the crochet chain, and that's picked up and knits one stitch. Insert the DPN into the next bump of the crochet chain, wrap the yarn around again and use the DPN to pull it through. So there's 2 stitches, and I'm going to do my I-cord over 4 stitches, so I just need to pick up 2 more. There's 3 and there's 4. So you see I started picking up a few chain in from the end, and now I have a few chain remaining on this side as well, and that's ideal. It just gives me a little bit of wiggle room when I start undoing this cast on edge, that it's not that the first chain I undo there's a stitch coming out of it. Right, now we're ready to begin knitting our I-cord. So as I said, the I-cord is always worked on the right side of your work. So we're now going to slide these stitches to the other end of the DPN, and we're going to knit across them. So my working yarn is attached over here, but that doesn't matter. I'm just going to pull it tightly across the back of the stitches and just start knitting as normal. So I'll work the first stitch, and then I'm going to pull the yarn tight, and then I'm going to knit the other 3 stitches. Let's just come off the needle, but we'll just pull it off. So 2, 3, and I'm pulling my yarn tight as I go, and 4. And now we're going to work the right side again. So we're going to slide it to the other end of the DPN. Once again, our yarn is attached over here. We're going to pull it across the back of our work and knit across these 4 stitches. So pull the yarn tight. 1, I'm just tugging the yarn, 2, 3, 4. Once again, slide the stitches, pull the yarn across the back of your work, and knit all 4 of those stitches again. So what you'll hopefully start to see is that we're creating a little cord, and it has the appearance of stockinette because we're always working the right side. So it's like you're working in the round, but because it's over such a small number of stitches, you don't need to have like a set of DPNs to knit it. You can just be sliding it and pulling the yarn tight. And if we have a look at what the other side looks like, it's joining that cord in the round. So all we're going to do is continue knitting this I-cord, just every single row, slide your stitches to the end of the needle, pull the yarn tight across the back of the stitches and knit them to the end. And this is just making our I-cord, and we're just going to be here for a while making this I-cord long enough that it will fit all the way around the perimeter of that knitted swatch that we had before. So I'm just going to spend a while knitting this I-cord, and then we'll come back and see what we do next. Okay, so my I-cord's gotten pretty long now. This is it here. And what I've been doing is just measuring its length against my knitted swatch very roughly. So I'm just sort of seeing how long it needs to be. I want it to get all the way around the perimeter of this shape and back to where my cast on is. So it's getting pretty close now. And this is just a very rough measurement. You don't need to be precise about it at all. But because this has gone quite long, I'm now going to start sewing it. And you can see, it's pretty hard to see where the reverse of the I-cord is, like this bit where the end and start of the round have joined together. But that's what I'm going to sew onto my knitting just to hide it as much as possible. Okay, so I've grabbed my tapestry needle that's threaded with this yarn I'm going to use for my seaming, and I'm going to use mattress stitch for this seam. So you might already be familiar with mattress stitch, but if not, it just basically involves picking up a bit of this knitted piece and then a bit of this knitted piece, a bit of this knitted piece, a bit of this knitted piece. So you're just picking up little bits along the edge, and then you pull your yarn tight and it just cinches those two bits of fabric together really neatly. So I'm going to start by attaching my yarn to this main bit of knitting by picking up an edge stitch, and it doesn't matter where you start attaching your I-cord to. You could attach it at a corner. I just find it a bit easier if I start sort of down the middle of an edge because it makes my grafting easier and how I've sort of measured the I-cord against the knitted fabric. So I'm just going to start from here, and I'm going to start by picking up one of these edge stitches with the tapestry needle. So just pick up both strands of that edge stitch and pull the yarn through enough that I can do a decent bit of seaming. And now I'm going to pick up a stitch from the I-cord. So I'm going to find where that join is, and I'm going to skip the first stitch that I can see, and that's because when I undo this provisional cast on, that is actually going to turn into a live stitch on the needle. So I don't really want to seam that. I want to seam the stitch above it. So I'm going to pick up this stitch here and pull the yarn through, and now both bits of knitting are attached. Then we're going to pick up the next edge stitch on this knitted fabric above the one that we just picked up. So pick up this one here and pull the yarn through, and then we pick up the next stitch of the I-cord. So we picked up that one there, we're now going to pick up that one there and pull the yarn through there as well. And that's all you need to do for mattress stitch. Just continue to repeat. Pick up that bit and pick up this bit and pull the yarn through. Make sure you pull out any other bits of yarn that are getting caught in the way. So there we go. So all we have to do is just keep repeating those steps to seam the I-cord all the way around. When I get to a corner, I might need to pick up, say, 3 I-cord stitches for one corner stitch just to make sure it's eased around really neatly. But otherwise, I'm just going to keep picking up at a 1-to-1 ratio because I know my gauge is the same, pretty much the same between these two bits of knitting. If yours isn't, and for instance, say that your I-cord is significantly tighter than your knitted fabric here, you may need to self-adjust. So you might need to pick up, say, 2 I-cord stitches for every 1 edge stitch you pick up the knitted fabric. Just whatever you need to do to make sure that the I-cord is sitting nice and flat and flush with that edge and it's not puckering or flaring in any way. Basically, I'm just going to keep working my way around, mattress stitching all the way. And once I've seamed as much as I can, we'll stop and we'll see what to do next. Okay, so I've been mattress stitching my I-cord all the way around these edges and I've gotten up to here. I did find that every now and again I needed to skip a stitch of the I-cord so that everything was sitting nice and flat. So what I mean by that is most of what I was doing was a 1-to-1 ratio. So for every stitch of the knitted fabric, this main knitted piece that I picked up 1 stitch of the I-cord. So if that was the case, the next stitch of the I-cord I would be picking up is this one here. But sometimes when I laid it flat, that didn't quite line up and I actually needed to skip one. So instead of this stitch, I would be going into this stitch just here. And that just added a bit of more extra I-cord fabric and helped everything to sit nice and flat and made sure that it wasn't puckering at all. So you might need to do that as well. Just see how you go, and you can just skip a stitch every now and again as you need it, or add some more stitches. So as you can see, I've actually run out of I-cord. I need a little bit more to be able to come around this corner and join up the 2 ends. But the beauty of leaving the stitches live on my needle is that I can simply return to them now and knit a bit more I-cord so that I have as much as I need. I may have also found that I knit too much, and if that was the case, you just simply undo whatever extra I-cord you have. If you found it awkward to be mattress stitching your I-cord while your needle was still attached to the end, you can also slip these stitches onto a stitch holder or a bit of waste yarn and tie it off, and then they're still live but this needle isn't in the way, and then you can always move them back to the DPN or other needle when you're ready. So I'm just going to knit the extra I-cord that I need to come around to here, and then we'll see how we join those two ends together. Okay, we're all done with our mattress stitching and with knitting our I-cord, and it's looking really nice and neat. So we came all the way around here to this point where we've met up with our cast on edge, and you can see that those ends just touch, so that's perfect. And we've also run out of stitches to attach the I-cord to in this edging, so we know we can't go any further. I actually did have a bit of excess I-cord fabric in the end that I had to undo a little bit to bring it back to this point, but that's easily done. So the next thing we're going to do is undo this provisional cast on and pick up the live stitches that are created, and then we're going to graft them together with these stitches that are still on our needle. Okay, so to undo our provisional cast on, we just need to undo this crochet chain. This end of the crochet chain has a knot on it and this one doesn't, so I know that this is the end that's going to be able to unravel. And all I need to do is pull this tail yarn out from the loop that it's caught in. So I pull that out, and now if I tug on this yarn, the chain will start to unravel. So we're going to unravel it all the way along, and that's going to reveal some live stitches just here. So if I just grab my other double pointed needle and show you, you should hopefully see that there is a stitch just here. There's a stitch just here, there's a stitch just here, and then rotating all the way around there's a stitch just at the back here. So that's 4 stitches, and that's how many I cast on, so that's the perfect number. So now I've actually picked them up, and if I undo this chain it should catch all the stitches. Now that's just gone a bit caught, but that's okay, you can still just keep unraveling like that, and then you can just pull this yarn out and that's fine, we've still caught everything. So there are our stitches there, and now we're going to graft them together with these 4 stitches here. Okay, so to graft my stitches together I'm going to use Kitchener stitch. Now my working yarn was still attached to this stitch here, and I've cut it leaving about a 30cm tail, and I've threaded my tapestry needle with that yarn. There are some other ends here, they were the ones that I was using for my mattress stitch and also the leftover yarn from my cast on. I'm just going to leave them be and we're going to weave them in afterwards. So for Kitchener stitch we have to do a little bit of a setup. So we're going to insert the tapestry needle into this first stitch on the front needle, purlwise. So these are the stitches from the I-cord, these are the provisional cast on stitches. Pull through that one purlwise and just pull the yarn through, and then we're going to insert the tapestry needle knitwise into this first stitch on the back needle and pull the yarn through, and making sure that it's not getting caught around any of the needles. There we go. And now we start our proper Kitchener pattern, which is insert the tapestry needle knitwise into this stitch and slip that stitch off the needle, pull the yarn through, insert into the second stitch on the front needle, which is now the first stitch, purlwise and pull the yarn through, insert into the first stitch on the back needle, purlwise, slip the stitch off and pull the yarn through, and insert knitwise into what is now the first stitch and pull the yarn through. And you just repeat that until you run out of stitches to graft. So knitwise, slip off, purlwise, don't slip off, purlwise, slip off, knitwise, don't slip off. So you repeat that until you just have 2 stitches left, and you can see that grafting them together has created a really seamless join. And to finish it off, we slip the last stitch off knitwise, catching it with the tapestry needle, and then purlwise the last stitch on the back needle and pull the yarn through. So the only thing left to do now is I can adjust the tension of these stitches if necessary, just to make them look really even. And I can use any of these tails to just sew that last little bit to this knitted fabric as well if necessary. And then I just weave in these ends and I'm all done. So that's how you work a sewn on I-cord border. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to subscribe to the channel. And if you have any questions or comments, do leave them below.